Hello and welcome to the Storytelling in Media, Storytelling in Games panel. I'm Ross Thompson, your moderator, and I'm joined by a fantastic cast of panelists, and we're going to talk all about stories and games. To start us off, Jon, can you tell us who you are and what you have going on?
Hey, I am Jon Cohn. I am a game designer, and I am part of Bread and Circuses, which is a game design studio. And I'm making some games.
That's great. Elisa?
Hi there, I'm Elisa Teague. I am a game designer and RPG author, and I am now the brand new senior producer of role-playing games at Renegade Game Studio.
Fantastic. Banana?
Hi, I'm Banana Chan, and I am the owner of a small board game and RPG publishing company called Game in a Curry, and I also design games and write for different games like RPGs and board games as well.
Fantastic. Matt?
My name is Matt Forbeck. I've been doing this for 30 years, I think now. I started out doing tabletop role playing. Nowadays, I often work in video games and novels, but I have a new Shotguns and Sorcery role playing game, which is part of the thing behind me. I'm working on one that's under a non-disclosure agreement right now, and I'm also writing a good chunk of the Biomutant video game coming out sometime soon.
Cool. Sen?
Hi, I'm Sen-Foong Lim. I'm a game designer from Canada, and I work on lots of stuff all the way from board games and card games to role-playing games. So yeah, it covers a wide gamut of games. And I've recently been mostly working for the Op, making a bunch of Coded Chronicles games, which are escape room games with heart and story.
Yes, we'll probably get into that in a little bit, which will be fun. So we all love playing games. We've all grown up playing games. Everybody here is a game designer and worked in stories and somehow. There's so many things that we can do, from game nights and mechanics and plays. It's all about creating that engaging story and having that fun time. So how do games tell a story? It's kind of a very vague question, but how do you feel that that story could be translated to the tabletop? Matt, you want to start us off?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you start with role-playing games are pretty much all about telling a story, right? But it's unique in the sense that it's not just an author sitting down and telling a story, but the game master, whoever that is, presenting the story or story possibilities to the players, and then doing a communal job on creating that story. And I think that's really where the magic in role-playing games comes from, or in games in general, is that there's not somebody just dictating a story, and it's not just going down a path, whatever, but all sorts of different possibilities that you never could have concocted on your own. I think that's really where the magic comes in.
So it's that open. So if anybody wants to jump in on that as well. Elisa?
You always know that I want to talk. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Role-playing games, obviously, like Matt said, it gives a chance for everybody around the table to contribute to the story, and the game is the story. But I don't think that should be just limited to role-playing games. Tabletop board games tell a story as well. Even if there are set mechanics in place, your experience around that table is a story. The game that you're playing may have a theme within it that tells a story, but also your gameplay itself, the memories that you create playing that game, tells a story of your life. So all games add to a story, in my opinion.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I was just talking about this a couple days ago with Emma Larkins and Gil Hova on Ludology, where Gil and I and Emma were talking about the differences between board games and role-playing games. And one of the things that came out was that, role-playing games are really good for building those memories of stories that we tell each other, that we co-create, like Matt was saying, where we are really like interplaying between each other and the setting and the rules and what the GM is putting in front of us, to have this big memorable occasion that has epicness to it because of dice rolling and uncertainty. And the level of uncertainty and that free flow of rules really does allow for people to craft an experience, which I think is really memorable. In terms of my day job, I'm a psychology professor, so this is like what I do all the time, is talk about memory and how it's built. And stories are quintessentially how we built memories as a species of human for like ever, right? Oral tradition. And really, role-playing games are kind of like a modern oral tradition I bet you every single one of you, all 6 of you, all 5 of you, including myself, 6, we could all tell a story right now about our favorite character in an RPG that we played for like 12 years, my level 18 paladin with, the +5 sword of whatever. We could tell those stories because they live within us. And they don't mean almost anything to anybody else, but anybody else who plays those games at least has a sense of, okay, I get what you're saying. But the people who played those games with us then will spin off into their epic tales of their epic roles and characters. Remember when? And that thing we did? I happen to live in a city where, I don't know if you've seen it, there's that one dungeon master who has like a 35-year campaign. He lives in my city.
Oh, yeah.
He's like around the corner from me. Yeah. With all the miniatures and stuff. So there are stories to be told. But like Elise said, I think there's a lot to be said about board games and almost the hybridization between board games and role-playing games that we're seeing nowadays, which, I think we've talked about for a while, for like at least 2 to 3 years. We've talked about, is it getting there yet? Where, you have role-playing games mixing with role-playing games mixing with board games and vice versa. And I think we're getting there. And I think that's where we're going to see that crossover. I do have a lot of friends in board games who are like, I don't want to tell a story. I want the story to be told to me. That's like, so it's a little more passive in terms of board gaming. And there was a question the other day online where somebody says, how come there are no memorable board game characters? And I mean, I can test that a little bit. There are certainly characters that are memorable within board games that aren't from like another IP, but they are few and far between. And there's a reason why. And it's because we don't have agency in creating that character. We don't have investment in that character like we do in an RPG character that we've created. In the same way within a board game. In a board game that doesn't have a meta that spans across games, it's even less so. So I think that there's definitely something we can do about that mechanistically through board games to help create more of a sense of story. And that's, I think, what legacy games are great for.
I think to go off of that as well, with what Sen's saying, I want to touch on 2 different kinds of games, like solo games, specifically solo journaling games, solo RPGs, and also story games broadly. So story games in general, like that use like prompts and, ask players to answer questions. I think those kinds of things could definitely be integrated into board games if we wanted to use them, right, for like a more story-driven type of scenario. I think that's really cool what people are doing right now, where they're, doing a lot of journaling RPGs that are really introspective. And I think that that's also something that we can borrow and like put into a board game if we wanted to make it like more story-based. But yeah, I'm like totally agreeing with what everyone's saying as well.
Yeah, everybody's answered it so well, but I feel like the only thing I can contribute at this point is a few recommendations of really good games that I've seen where Sen was saying how we now have hit that hybridization where you have some board games that are a little bit more mechanically standard, but still convey a strong element of story. I think the big one, obviously, Gloomhaven, that people have played, that's the big campaign. But I've been playing through the Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth game recently, which is just so fantastic to allow you to play something that's very standard and very accessible, but also lets you really choose the level of story that you want to get out of it. You could rush in and just play the game as, we're going in and we're going to smash some bad guys and we're going to complete the objectives, but you can also come at it from a very storytelling standpoint where the way I like to play it, I like to kind of be the GM and read all of the text aloud with some flourish and flair, and really turn it into one of those experiences that the memory you get from the game was the story and not necessarily just the dice rolls or the cards that you played. So a lot of what the good games that really exemplify storytelling, I think also have that option open to allow the players to choose to dig in on the story and really get a more rich experience from that. Or if they want to play it as a more standard board gaming experience, that's available to them as well.
That's a good point.
Definitely.
I think that a lot of it also is that players can choose to insert their story into a board game where you would normally not find a story. Like I was thinking while you guys were talking and responding, like what are the great stories that I've had coming out of games that aren't really necessarily designed to give that story, but I definitely have them. one of my favorite games, Tokaido. I definitely can, like, every single time I draw a random character, I make up a journey that I want to have for my character. It's like, I'm an artist and I'm traveling through the countryside. And like, that is a story that I am telling as I am playing that game, and there are games that may have, beautiful thematic elements to it that I do remember epic games of Tokaido that I've played. I also remember epic games of like hidden identity games, trader games and things like that. And, not to plug one of my own, but like Betrayal at House on the Hill, every single game of that is a story where it's like, yes, and I remember that you were the traitor and this is what happened. And like, they're great retellings of these things when they are not role-playing games. These are just standard board games. So I think they exist. I just don't think it's necessarily obvious to players that exists there.
Mm-hmm. I really like what Jon was saying about like allowing players to dig in if they want. One of my favorite ways of storytelling as of late has been things like in Dark Souls, where there's just like little itty bits of like text on a wall. And if you want to dig in, you're like, oh, look at that. You follow this rabbit hole down this story. It's just like flavor text on Magic cards used to be, right? It's like, I didn't know who Urza was for like years. Had no clue.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, they're the master artificer of this whole world and blah, 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 blah. I just thought it was a cool card that, did something.
Right.
But once you dig in, it's like, oh, this story and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of stuff that can be leveraged in gaming in between the games as well. So there's that meta that we can have between the games that tells these stories that are super cool for the people who really want to actually live and delve into the world, as opposed to just playing the game and putting it away in the shelf and then bringing it out. And there's stuff in between.
Yeah, we did that a lot in video games, right? I mean, in video games, you have a certain amount of lore. If you want to pick up on it, you can read it, you can listen to it if they're tapes or whatever, but you don't have to, right? You can just, because half the players will just click through every dialogue. As a video game writer, it's frustrating, but that means the people who really do care about it are the ones that are actually reading along and getting involved and paying attention. I think having that kind of way to telescope it like that, that's something we're struggling a little bit with board games, but I think it's doable. And also, I mean, we were talking about, is there a character you remember? I mean, everybody remembers like Colonel Mustard, right? Like half of it is just having a name for a character, right? It's not like I was the blue one, the blue pawn. That doesn't mean anything to anybody, but just putting a character in there really does a lot just to advance that whole idea that this is a story that you're telling and a persona you're taking on.
I think going back to what Elisa was saying earlier with like Betrayal and games like that use these visual prompts and like the choose your own adventure type of storytelling that's integrated into board games, I think that's really successful in like storytelling in general. Like there's that, and then there's like games like Dead of Winter that are dependent on like the text on the cards and the artwork. I think for more like visual players, like Dixit or Mysterium, like those are definitely story-driven games. It's just that you're dependent on like the visuals rather than the text. So that's like a very like different way of storytelling with board games, I think, too.
Very cool.
Those are all good points, and it's interesting that we kind of like, this is an interesting topic, right? Because gaming is, whether you're doing the tabletop with a role-playing game or with a board game, everything has their own little story to it. And it's funny, the first character that popped in my mind for a board game character was the barbarian from Hero Quest, right? Because that's like when I think about an iconic thing, it kind of pops up too, right? So everyone here has worked on some kind of game that has a story with it and has gone on. So I would love everybody to kind of go around, share a story with a game that you've worked on. What mechanic do you feel that was a big driver for that? Or was it art-based, or was it something that had to do with the theme? How do you feel that kind of helped push the story along? We can kind of give everybody a little hot second on that, but it's interesting to think about, because there's like, for me, one of the main things that pops up when I look at a board game, whether it's a box top or a book cover, is like the cover art, right? For me, that immediately kind of sets the theme and sets the setting for what kind of game we're going to do. And even like walking around the game store as a kid, like you look at all these epic stories that are on books or in box tops or for models and everything, and you're like, there's already something here, it's caught my eye, now I want to get it on the table and create that experience. And now that here we are publishing, I'm sure we all have those same memories of how do I help create that experience. So as we're doing that now, even in a digital platform, we're still looking at a PDF cover or whatever. How do you feel some of those things help push that story along? Jon?
Yeah. So I made a game called Grindhouse. It's available through everything Epic. And that game is like 90% story and I'm in like 10% mechanics. And the reason for that was I wanted to create something that reminded me of those choose your own adventure books that I read as a kid and have it really be player choice that unfolds the story rather than making it all about dice rolls or something like that. I wanted it to be, here's a block of text that sets up a situation, and they're all horror situations because it's the Grindhouse. And so it's a kind of a survival horror type of thing. But the real storytelling in that, it was kind of twofold, was supposed to be setting up an actual physical story. And then it would give somebody an option. It would say like, one volunteer must choose to either, go into an Iron Maiden or stay out and like press a button. And so then their choice would then have consequences that either rang through just them or through the whole group. And so by having the game really throw a lot of story at you and then have you interacting with how that story concludes, that was where I really wanted to have my focus. And so there is some dice rolling, and there's some blind decision making at points, and then there's some informed decision making. I wanted to keep it pretty all over the place to keep people on their toes. But in the end, there's something like 140 different rooms that people get to go through, and each one tells its own very distinct story that hopefully weave together to create a memorable narrative experience.
It's great, Elisa.
I am trying to pick one game that fulfills this. I think I'm going to go RPG,
Okay.
just to be a little different. So, and I'm going to go with Wardlings because Wardlings has a great story behind it, and it also gives players a lot of choice. It is a role-playing game. So Wardlings is a campaign setting that I designed based on the 5e mechanics. But the cool thing about it is that when I was designing it, I was given some information to work with. It is a license from WizKids, and it's based on a minis line of little children who play in this who are in this fantasy world. And WizKids made these minis, but didn't have a real story for it, but wanted one. And so all I had to go with as the inspiration, like what you were asking, was the pre-existing minis line and the few lines of text that were on the back of the packaging. And I wanted to create a world where people of all ages could tell their stories as if they were playing a child in this fantasy world. And how is it different to be a child that has these, spell casting abilities and powers and fighting abilities, but still looked at as a child? And it really opens up so many opportunities for creative storytelling. There's so many narrative decisions that groups can make that are different than from, say, Dungeons and Dragons, where you're always playing this, like warrior buff, like whatever character. It's so different to think in the terms of the same type of world, but you're a child. What is a decision that a child would make? What are the consequences there of that? And all of those decisions. And it was a really unique design challenge for me. I love design challenges. And I think it really opens up the possibility for players around the table to contribute to growing up. Usually you start one of these games, you're already an adult. You have your history already made, and it's your history and your background that has informed all of your decisions. It's like, oh yeah, when I was a child, I was abandoned by my parents, and then I had to fend for myself, and that's why I'm now a thief, and all of these things. Like everybody has that backstory, but in Wardlings, you are the child. You are forming who you are going to be when you are an adult.
Right. Yeah, and the art's fantastic for that too. So
I didn't do the art. Jackie Davis did the art.
I know. I'm just saying that, like, I
was
love
a
looking
cheap
at all the
guy.
different stuff, right? So it's good. Still to play it. Banana.
I'm going to talk about a game that Sen-Foong and I worked on, which
Right.
is Jiangshi, Blood in the Banquet Hall, which is a tabletop RPG that we worked on. And basically, players take on the roles of a Chinese family running a restaurant in the 1920s. It has several phases. So you have your daytime phases and your nighttime phases. And in the daytime, you're running this restaurant, you're doing your chores, you're trying to, get through all the oppression that's happening at the time. And in the night, juncture, these hopping vampires, they come out and they like attack everyone. So it's a very thematic game, mostly because a lot of the stuff that we have worked into this, like the boards, the character sheets, like all of it is like, the theme matches the mechanics and like the items that are in this thing. And obviously, like Sen, if you want to talk more about it as well, you can definitely like jump in and chime in about it. But I think that that's like one of the more thematic slash like thematic games that I've worked on, which like definitely marries like theme and mechanics like really heavily. And also because like, we're both Chinese, like we know a lot about like the culture and like the, the experience, specifically the immigrant experience. So we know like, what informs the mechanics, like what best informs the mechanics and how to like integrate things.
And that just finished up on Kickstarter a little bit ago, right?
It did. I think that was like 2 months ago. I can't even tell what
It's all blur, right? But yeah.
It is all
Yeah.
wibbly wobbly.
That's exciting. I'm looking forward to that game as well.
Thanks.
I like
Thank
it.
you.
Okay, right? It's going to be cool. Matt, you want to hop in?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about two things real quick. I wrote the latest series of Endless Quest books for Dungeons and Dragons, which are choose your own adventure, or that's trademark, so it's pick a path or whatever you want to call it. But that's your traditional thing where there's a flow chart and you have to build it out and write them, and it's an interesting challenge. But that's less of a game and more of it's very interesting cross between narrative and game mechanics, right? But that's something we've known about for like 30 years. One of the earlier jobs I had, I actually was the developer for a supplement for a game called Space Hulk for Games Workshop back in like 1989, right? And one of the supplements came out was called Deathwing. And my roommate at the time was a guy named William King, who's a best-selling author nowadays. But Bill was in charge of writing the story for the thing called Deathwing. And then I was there doing the game design with Richard Hallowell, who was actually the designer of the game. And we were dictated about how we were supposed to do the story, right? And the story would bring you through different parts of it. And then, and it would be intertwined in between the different missions you had to play. And then the story ends with this cliffhanger. And you're like, well, I don't know what the hell happens. But what we did is we integrated so that the climax of the campaign is actually the big battle the story's been leading up to. So when you read the story, you have no idea what's going to happen. It's just this, who knows? It's all ambiguous. But then you get to go out and play it and come up with your own answer for that, right? And you can play it over and over and come up with different styles for it. And we were really excited about that at the time. I mean, it was 30 years ago, but it was a ton of fun. And I think, it's interesting to see how people can do that. I can just mimic or bring in different types of artwork and story and game mechanics all at the same time and have them reinforce each other and dovetail together so they feel intuitive when you're doing it, right? So when you're playing through it, you don't say, oh, wow, that's stunning. You just play through and go, that was fun. But when we're creating it, we're like, holy shit, I can't believe we came up with this. Basically we're sitting in our apartment drinking and we're like, what if we did this? And okay, what do you know? It works. So it's just a matter of like a lot of times just banging your head against the wall until something makes sense to you as a designer. And, because you iterate, you throw out lots and lots of stuff and a lot of it just never sees the light of day. And then that one shining idea comes through and people respond to it. It's pretty cool.
That's great. I had no idea that you worked on Space Hulk. I was literally just looking at a thing for that this morning for some Terminators for a thing I'm working on for a hobby.
That's a great thing.
That's great. Sen, you want to go on?
Yeah, so I guess I'll talk about an IP thing that I did, which was with Ross and the op, Scooby-Doo Escape from the Haunted Mansion. And it's an escape room in a box. So it's a little bit different than, because you don't have agency. There's no real agency with it. Oh, and there's a Shining right over there, which is the next one in the series. And we're working on the third one right now, but I can't talk about it. Heads would roll, probably mine. Oh yeah, Ross's would too, if you allowed me to say it. So the neat thing about it is that we've gotten so much good feedback about Scooby-Doo because it's a story that people know and they understand it because it has so many tropes. It's like 50 years old as of last year, right? It was the 50th anniversary of Scooby-Doo. And there are so many people who are like, This is bringing me back to my childhood. I can share this with my kids now, and it's a fun game. And the thing about it is there's not a lot of decisions in the game because it's an escape room, right? So you're solving puzzles after puzzles after puzzle after puzzle, but they're fun little puzzles. And what we hear most from people is that the puzzles were good, but the story was amazing. And that, I think, is a real testament to, Jay and myself as the writers of the game, that we made decent puzzles, and we can make really good puzzles if we have to, but we understand that people actually don't want really hard puzzles. They want puzzles along with a story that they can read and follow and flow through. And if they can't get to the next stage of the story because they're stuck on a puzzle, they get very mad at me. They get like really mad at me. So, and the story is really engaging because I'm a Scooby-Doo fan. Jay's a Scooby-Doo fan. I've watched every single thing that ever has been done on Scooby-Doo ever. Except the latest one, just because I haven't got around to it, Scoob. But the rest of it, like I've digested all of that. And I think it comes out in the writing as a love letter, an homage to the whole, Hanna-Barbera thing that was done for years and years and years. And every other iteration past there.
Sen, by the way, was when we submitted that and it came back, they thought it was one of their episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So
they thought yes. Yeah, right. It was like imitation is the best form of flattery, and being flattered by being an imitator is pretty cool too. So that was one of my favorite moments in game design, my game design career so far, right? But yeah, I think it's interesting because there are definitely people who just want to be along for the ride, and I think that's okay. Right? I just want to have a story told to me. I want to read that in between the games. I don't want to be put on show and have to, emote. But the thing is that they do when they get this Scooby-Doo story. We have people doing the voices and like acting like Shaggy and like talking like Scooby and losing their glasses like Velma all over the place. And they tell us about it because it's super fun to do. I hope nobody grabs an axe when they're playing,
Yeah, we're going to find out, right? So,
well, nobody gets to play Jack, so there you go.
Yeah,
it's okay in the game, not so
yeah,
much outside.
not so much outside the game.
But yeah, I was going to say when I finally sat down and played Betrayal Legacy with my kids, right? It took us like a year to get through, forever. But by the time we got to like the 6th mission, we didn't care who won. We didn't,
right.
Kind of fun to see who the traitor was, right? But we're really like, let's just finish this and see what the heck happens next, So I think that's when you're really succeeding at that kind of a thing, where the game, if you have a good story, it gives context to the game, so it means something to you, right? And the game itself, how it comes out, the winners and losers don't matter as much. It's really about what you're doing as a group, as a communal activity. I think that's fantastic.
It's funny that you say that because that's how I think a lot of non-RPG players think about RPGs.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they literally say, like, what do you mean you don't have to use those rules? Says, oh, I don't use encumbrance rules. Who would use encumbrance rules? Encumbrance sucks. Let's not play with encumbrance rule. Also, let's not play with hit tables. And that alignment stuff, we're not doing that. We're all decent humans. We're all decent people. You can be an elf, but you have to be decent. Or tiefling, but you're decent. Right?
So just chaotic in general.
Chaotic's fine, but evil? No. We don't have evil in our house. No, thank you, evil. Also a good game. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that board games, because board games fall apart, literally fall apart at the seams if you don't follow the rules. And so that's sort of where I think RPGs have that they're much more suited to telling good stories, because I mean, that's what they're about ostensibly, but also because if you go off track, we can fix it by just, retconning stuff and talking about it versus having like, oh, we need to make new cards because what you just did is totally out of the box of what we want to do with this game. So I think they're both great for different things, right? But I also don't think they have to be separate. I think you can have story inside of it or story outside of it or between it. Like Matt was saying, I think that's a great way to put story in games, is like that interstitial stuff in between the scenarios, or what Banana was saying, like near and far and above and below, use the kind of choose your adventure, choice A, choice B type of stuff to drive a lot of the game. And honestly, it doesn't make a lot of mechanical difference, but people love to make those choices because it's that agency that they have. And they feel like it changed the game. They feel like it made it more their story, and that's cool. I'm okay with that.
Right. And so that rolls right into the next question, right? Which is like, what kind of game mechanics do you think help drive the story? Right. And because we could have role-playing games, board games, legacy games, solo journal games, which I just learned about that a few months ago. which has been really cool. So, what kind of mechanics do you guys enjoy using when designing games, and what do you think are really big right now? Anna, you want to kick us off?
Definitely solo journaling games. I think that that's like ramping up a lot. Like a lot of people are starting to do that with role-playing games. I think also in the RPG sphere, a lot of people are playing on Discord now because of COVID and everything. So it's interesting seeing like how people are using Discord as this way of telling a story. So like actually integrating the platform into storytelling instead of using it to play D&D, for example, or using it to play like another RPG. They're actually like, using it to play a game. For example, one of the last games I played was Alice is Missing. So we played that over Zoom. So it has that like, you have like everything set up for you. You can see everything that's going on, but then you're also like texting one another over the phone. And then like another game that I played was Strangers on the Internet, where you're actually using forums on Discord and like pretending that you're your teen self role playing as like Sailor Moon or something. And then 20 years later, you're role playing as you, pretending to be, that character who's like 20 years older. So like, I think that using these tools that we have available to us, like these pieces of technology, that's like something that's been around for a while, but now people are starting to use it more because
they're forced to.
Right.
Because we're forced to. So like things like that, and just like, using another cool game is that I found out I played recently was Jeff Dieterle's Longtime Listener, Last Time Caller, which is a radio show. So there's a GM who's pretending to be the radio DJ, and then players just drop in and out. They can be like, listeners, they could be people who are calling in and being like, hey, I'm, looking for my like a lover or something like that. Like that's the kind of game that's really interesting to me right now, because I think that it's using the technology that we have and we're making it more immersive versus playing over Zoom and getting Zoom fatigue and getting really tired of like, seeing people. Not sure if you're, paying attention to me or not. So I think
as we're here on Zoom, right? So
Totally paying attention to you.
Yeah.
For mechanics, I feel like it's not necessarily certain mechanics are important for good storytelling. I think it's accessibility that's important for storytelling. If you have a game that's overly complicated and you're getting bogged down in the minutia of rules and you're going back and referencing the rule book, that's when you're losing the story, because good storytelling has to have flow. And you kill that flow the second that you say, oh, geez, wait, how do we do this? What's going on? It just rips you right out of that moment. And so having things that are very accessible, easy to understand, and you go in knowing exactly what you're supposed to do and what's expected of you, allows you to stop worrying about what am I supposed to do on my turn? How am I supposed to do this? What is this modifier? And instead you think, well, how would this character act? What's the best thing for this person in this moment to react to, and how would they do that? And so in that regard, I think that it's all about making something simple, easy to understand, and easy to get you in the moment. Well, I think one of the most popular games everybody's always talking about on Reddit now is Among Us, this video game. And I played it a little bit, and it's the simplest game you could imagine. And that's why it's so popular. It's all storytelling. It's all about who was the imposter. Oh, and I thought that I was the imposter, and I got booted out of the ship because of this and that. And it's all storytelling, and it's all bred out of simplicity.
Mm-hmm. I like what you're saying. So just from if you want to get therapeutic about it and psychological about it, what you're talking about is a flow experience, which Haley Csikszentmihalyi is a psychologist from University of Chicago, who defined flow experiences as when our mastery level is, even keel to the challenge that's applied to us, right? And really what you're talking about is amazing, because that's why dungeon masters exist, right? Because a dungeon master is a guy who knows all the rules, or the girl who knows all the rules and does all the calculation, looks at all the stupid lookup tables and knows what encumbrance means. I still don't know what encumbrance means. But if we didn't have that, and this is why I think some GM-less systems actually don't do great for me, because I have to jump out of my character to then remember the rules, and jump out of my character to remember the rules. But that's exactly what you're saying. If the rules are approachable, then we can have more story involved because we don't have to, worry about the bogged down of the rules, which I guess, Matt, is why video games work so well as a narrative form, right?
Because you don't have to worry about the rules. They're right there. I mean, you just push the button and it happens, right? So, but I think the main thing about mechanics is that if you just have mechanics that feel like they fit the story, or story like they feel they fit the mechanics, then it works better. Because if the story feels like it fits the mechanics and vice versa, then you intuitively understand what you're supposed to be doing in the game, right? And if the mechanics flow with that as opposed to obstructing that at any point, then it doesn't interrupt that flow for you. And I think that's really important, right? It also means that when you sit down and say, okay, this is the story about the game, this is what the game's about, what do I do in here? If I can't do the things I think I should be able to do, that throws you out of that verisimilitude, right? If you're like, well, it's a Scooby-Doo game, but I can't look for Velma's glasses, and what the hell's going on here? Or where's the Scooby stacks, right? And, if those things aren't available, then you're like, well, this doesn't really feel the way it should. But if you have a property like Scooby-Doo, and you're like, okay, these are the tropes, these are the things I need to put into it, and it makes it feel more real and substantial for people. And I think that's really what you need to do. It's not really a particular mechanic, but just making sure the mechanics and the story dovetail together nicely. And if you pull that off, it makes, again, it's kind of a magical thing. It's amazing.
I totally agree with Matt, in so much that I was jotting down some notes so I wouldn't forget while you guys were talking. And the first thing on my notes list was talking about not wanting to break immersion. And by not breaking immersion is what you need to do is make sure that your theme and your mechanics really mesh well together, because nothing is worse for storytelling is somebody just like saying, this wouldn't actually happen in, 17th century France, like totally breaks you out of the story, right? And so I'll skip over talking about that since you just put it so well, and I'll go to other mechanics that I think drive storytelling is player choice, which was briefly mentioned, is super important because it gives a player agency. Yes, there are those players that just want to go through the motions in certain games, and that's fine. But player choice within those motions will allow them to have the agency of their game, and they can actually own the game. They can actually feel like they are a part of that experience. Also, I feel like asymmetrical design is really great for storytelling because it actually gives everybody a unique role in the game. And by taking on a unique role and having opposing things that you're supposed to do, you're going to take on, that character that you're building in your head automatically, because you're not just doing the same thing as somebody. You're not just like rolling the dice, moving your stuff, and you're done. You have to actually think about what everybody else's stories are and how you're going to modify your story in order to circumvent what they are trying to do with their story. So I think that's a really good mechanic that will drive storytelling. And last, I'm trying not to talk too much or too long.
You're all good. You're all good.
Games, because I'll go on forever. You know that.
You're good. I'm watching time. You're fine.
A timer or a sense of urgency really add to storytelling. And Banana, when you were talking about Alice is Missing, I went to some of my favorite like indie role-playing games, and one of my favorites is 10 Candles. And 10 Candles has this mechanic with the actual 10 candles that are lit, and when the candles go out, the game is over and everybody's dead, right? And so that sense of urgency, every single time a gust of wind blows through the room and the candles everybody gets more tense, everybody and that is a group storytelling game at its core, but it really drives the horror nature of the game, and it drives that story so much because you are actually afraid as a player that the game is going to be over before you're done, before you're finished telling that story. So games that have that physical impact on people, I've played that game where the entire room is just in absolute tears at the end of it. It's so emotional. It invokes such an amazing response out of people. Having that type of like visceral reaction out of people is just, ultimate storytelling in games.
Cool. One of the things that I'll just touch on something that Elisa said in terms of like legacy mechanics where you're destroying things that you've actually written on. Like you've given something a name. It's like when they tell you not to like name your, the food that you're going to eat, right? Like if you grew up on a farm, you don't name the calves, right? That kind of thing. Because in Legacy, there's this really huge psychological burden that people feel when they destroy cards. That's so much so that some people won't play a Legacy game because they can't make themselves destroy a card in order to have this great experience. It's just too visceral for them. But on that note, what I like mechanically is artifacts. And Banana knows this because Banana and I work together quite a bit. But I like games that create something that you can take away with you after you've played and say, I remember because of this, right? So if you've ever played games like The Quiet Year where you're drawing a map or something like that, that is just like chef's kiss, right? It's like you got this thing, this artifact that you remember, and you can tell stories about the story that you just told to other people. And so one of the games that Banana and I worked on, it's called Exquisite Corpse or something. We don't really know what it's called yet.
Something
Do we
like
know what
that.
it's called?
I think
And
no, wait, it's Exquisite Murder. That's the thing.
Okay, yeah.
That's the
So
name.
it's literally using that grade school exquisite corpse thing that like expressionists surrealists used, where you fold it 3
surrealists.
times and you have like little joining dots and you kind of draw things, and then you flip it over, the next person draws stuff, and you flip it over, the next person draws stuff. And we're using that in order to create a game. And that artifact of that, whatever you made, that creature or thing that you made afterwards lives on, and you tell stories about that. And then we played it. We've only really play tested it once or twice. And every time we play test it, somebody wants all of the art. They're like, can I keep all of that? I want to make a coffee table book out of it. Was what Julie said, actually.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just so funny, but it's true. Like artifacts are really important things. I still have, I carry around, like I'm a nerd. I have the first D20 from my very first set of Dungeons and Dragons dice. I carry it with me everywhere. I have my character sheets from when I was like 7, 8 years
I got those in a
old.
folder too, right? So,
Right? So those
yeah.
things that we create and we put effort into, and the funny thing is, like I have all these PDF ones now. I don't keep them, but the ones that I wrote on, those I keep because I created them with my own hands. And so I think that the idea of artifacts is really important, especially in a world where we're so very digital. And I like using those to create story and memory.
Which is a good point. I literally have 2 framed Pandemic Legacies from Kingdom Con's past, where the whole people played the whole game
Yeah.
over the course of the whole con.
Yeah.
And so everybody signed it and played it, and then I have it framed, but it's literally in the other gaming room over there, right? So it's just been like, it's one of those cool things where like they tweeted out during the show too, is if you wanted to follow where the game was going on, if you were in game 2 but you weren't in game 3 or game 4, which has been pretty kind of neat for that, right? So on to our next question though, because we got a couple more we're going to cover here. So Banana kind of talked on it a little bit, where like right now, because of COVID, we are doing this panel on Zoom, and at the same time, there's been so much more gaming online. I'm actually playing more games now than I was before. I've got 2 D&D games that I'm doing. I have a hobby hangout that we do on Saturdays. So the amount of gaming that I'm consuming personally has jumped up. But at the same time, there's a lot, like we are able to play games and do panels and do much more with people all around the world, right? And it's much more accessible to like go to Gen Con or go to Origins or whatever, because of how we're doing all these things. But at the same time, there's barriers that are now put up, right? It's much more difficult to meet new people if we're going to do networking, if we're going to do these different things. The online cons are doing their best, right? With Gen Con and Mojo Nation, they're trying to create these networking environments and with board game pitches. Here's your video, here's your thing. I can send you the components. Maybe they got a 3D printer, they can print a thing up. But it's not the same as just going, having your pitch on a napkin and going there at the bar, right? So how do you make that happen? So how has COVID-19 affected gaming? How has it affected game design? And what are we doing about it? John, you want to go first?
Yeah, it's affected it in pretty much all facets. I've gotten really good at using Tabletop Simulator, which, if you're not familiar, it's a program that basically allows you to import your game into a video game, basically, and then you can host and play it online with other people. So that has been a really valuable tool for game design. It actually opens you up to sometimes a wider group of play testers, because your play testers are limited to usually the people you know, or if you go to conventions, which we're not doing, and hosting those games then. So having these digital tools, and it's been around for a few years, but I've really actually spent the time to learn how to use it now. And Tabletopia is the other big one. So that for me has been kind of the biggest challenge, but also has been really rewarding once you get into it.
Matt? Oh, I think you're on mute. Can you guys hear him?
Matt, I think you're muted.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Hello.
There we go. You're good now.
Sorry. Personally, it hasn't changed my life a whole lot because, I've been a full-time freelancer forever, which means that, I'm used to sitting at home by myself and playing games. And I live in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. But I also have my kids here with me, which means we get a chance to play a lot of games together, which is lots and lots of fun. But, I agree with what Jon was saying. It's been sometimes when I'm playtesting stuff, it's hard to get together with people. So Tabletop Simulator, we've been using Roll20 for one of our things as well, where one of the guys is pretty good at JavaScript, so he's been actually coding everything together. I do think we're having to rely more on these digital tools. But honestly, if these digital tools didn't exist, I wouldn't have had a career anyway. I mean, I need to be able to do all this stuff from a distance. I'm very rarely traveling to the coast to pitch things to people. So it's mostly being done over internet before this. But it's just, it's much more emphatic now, I guess, right? And we're definitely doing a lot more over video. I mean, it used to be you just did by email. Now people are like, I just want to see somebody. I want to hear a voice, right? So screw the email. We're going to do a video call. But, I have to put a shirt on. What the hell?
Let's talk about Banana. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing a lot of live action online games, or GLAUGs as they're called. We've seen them before, right? Like they've been around for maybe 4 or 5 years, but now it's just like everyone's playing online games now. So yeah, recently it's been a lot of like Discord. Like I haven't used Discord a lot before, but now I'm like forced to use Discord a lot. And just, I guess, having, as we were talking about like artifacts, I think that I'm starting to collect like a lot of these digital artifacts. So, whether they're from vlog LARPs, or they're from, journaling LARPs, or they're from, radio LARPs, like that's something that's been building up in my hard drive. So just like collecting a whole lot of that and, filling up my storage space.
It's great. Elisa?
I think everybody's covered the basics of what everybody's doing. I've been using a lot of Roll20 and, Tabletop Simulator as well. Even Zoom call, playing games over Zoom, where one person has a board game, and this works especially well with party games. You're able to play party games. One person has the game and everybody else is doing whatever they're doing, so that, and playing along. And so it's almost like right now over Zoom, when you're playing a game like that, the person is a dungeon master or a game master, right? Except it's not a role-playing game. They're leading the game, but everybody else plays along, and it works out just fine for people who are a little bit shy about using Tabletop Simulator. It's really easy to learn though. Roll20 is doing such a great job. These platforms are literally driving the industry right now under COVID. I actually saw a meme about it today and it was hilarious, but it's just the state of things right now. Is the only way to play with other people safely, unless you have 5 kids in your house, is
yeah.
I don't recommend it. It requires years and years of planning, right?
It does.
But yeah, and play testing, it's a really good point. Like it's very difficult to get play testers if you're not going to be doing it over Zoom. But I think that this is a sign for the future, because this is a great way that people have been introduced to playing games with people that they don't get to normally see. I'm in 3 D&D games a week that I'm a player in, and I'm not a GM or anything, and I get to actually play. And one of those groups is with a bunch of people who live on the East Coast. I never would have played in a game with them before this. And now it's basically opened up all of our eyes to, hey, you can play with people across the world. It doesn't matter, and you can have a wonderful play experience using this technology. So I'm just thankful that we have the technology to do this.
Mm-hmm. Banana and I play with people in Australia, and we always, every day, every time we play, it's like, are we playing tonight or tomorrow morning? Because it's always
Right.
it messes us all up. But I think digital tools are really interesting because of my training as a behavior person. I watch people, and so I miss that in playtesting just on tabletop. There's a couple other things that I dislike about digital testing. So I'm gonna be the person who's the stick in the mud about digital testing.
Go for it, man. It's all good.
But so we're in our development team. We work with a bunch of publishers who are like, yeah, we're fully on digital. It's fine. Let's do this thing digitally. And one of the problems is that they forget that this game actually has to get produced in paper. And so they have all this stuff, and I'm like making it in paper because I want to play it with my hands, because that's how the game is going to be experienced in the end. As I'm a developer, I have to develop it to its full potential. And I have to email them back and say, did you realize like how many things you've made and how many dice you want people to roll at once? And it's really easy in Tabletop Simulator to make all this stuff. You just make it. There it is. It exists, and you don't have to roll all of them. You can like mass select a whole bunch of dice and hit like R, and they all roll for you magically. But you can't do that with 35 real dice. It doesn't work quite right. So there's a couple things about Tabletop Simulator and even Tabletopia that make my job harder. That I have to say to every publisher, it's like, okay, here's how long it took us. Now divide that by like 0.75, and that's probably how much it's really going to take, but we still don't know, right? And then there's some different accessibility issues there with Tabletop Simulator, but in general, it's not too bad. I just miss, seeing people's behaviors, because that's really what tells me if a game is hot like now or not, in terms of where it is, because I can't see you through the screen. Even if we have like a zoom up while we're playing on Tabletop Simulator, I just can't see. I just can't tell that you're leaning forward and really engaged, or you're like bored and disengaged, or because you could just be bored and disengaged because it's on Zoom. I don't know. It might not be the game. There's just too many factors for me to be really solidly making a decision about it. So I'm sad. Zoom makes me sad. I'm on Zoom all the time, by the way. As a professor, I teach on Zoom like 6 hours a day. So this is yet hour 7. But it's, it is what it is, and we'll get through it together until we can game in person together, right?
We will, and it's going to be good. And it's a good point you bring up. Like it's as cool as it is that we're able to play games with everybody across the world and do these things and do that stuff. Like even for my Tuesday game last week, the DM described this whole sewer scene. We popped down into the sewers. We're getting chased by bugbears. He cut out. We didn't know what happened, and then like 30 seconds later, he's like, "Cool, did you guys hear that?" We're like, "Oh man, you cut out." And he's like, "Oh, I need a minute. Okay, give me a moment," because he just explained the whole thing, and it's just like, so. But we'll get there, right? Because like it's as we're changing with Roll20 and TTS, and there's so many different things we can do that are playing games. And like what I really enjoy is how there's so many new communities that have popped up since March. Twitter has been huge to find all these different things. I've discovered so many live play games through Twitter that I never would have done if I was working at a convention, because I'm stuck in the booth, right? And there's been so many new creators, designers, and people that I never would have been able to experience. And I've got my other screen on. I'm watching something almost all the time where it's like, oh my gosh, look at this new game, look at these new folk, and it's so cool. And the community is pushing it forward, right? And we want to, out of everything going on in 2020, gamers are powering through and making it happen. And it's really cool to see. And like time-wise, we're a little short on my next question, which is kind of like, where do you see gaming going forward in 21? But I think we can roughly all agree that gamers are going to make it happen, right? Like, and whatever happens in the world with the social narrative, we're going to create our own thing, and we know where we want to go, and we have the champions that are going to take it there, which is really exciting. So on that though, we got about 5 minutes left that they'd be there 5 minutes up. Let's please go around and share where we can find you, what game you want to bump or promote, or an event you have going on, share where they can find it. Remember, this will be out in a couple weeks, but let's all just promote that and make it happen. Sen, you want to kick us off?
Sure. My name is Sen-Foong Lim. You can find me on Twitter at Sen-Foong Lim, and a weekly webcast on Facebook, which is the Meeple Syrup Show. It's every Wednesday, designers talking about design with other designers. And as a plug, if you're on to if you like Chinese food and hopping vampires, go back. Jiangshi, Blood in the Banquet Hall by myself and Banana Chan. I think the late backer kit's open right now, so go do that.
Awesome. Matt?
Let's see. You can find me at forbeck.com. You can also find me on Twitter at mforbeck. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, all the other good things. My latest things are I had a Minecraft Dungeons novel, The Rise of the Arch Illager, come out in July, based on the video game, and my Shotguns and Sorcery role-playing game also came out in July. So I'm pushing those hard.
Awesome. Banana?
I'm Banana Chan, and you can find me on Twitter at Banana Chan Games. And you can also find my small publishing company at Game and Curry on Twitter. And I think other than Jiangshi, the next thing that we have on the line is Questlings, the RPG that we're collaborating with Letterman Games. So that's coming out in November on Kickstarter.
Cool. Elisa?
Okay, hi. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, all the rest at Geeky Pinup. And you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/the Elisa Teague. Latest things. Okay. Well, I already talked about my 5e campaign setting, Wardlings, which just came out this past summer. So please pick that up. And coming up soon, releasing in November, is I have a section that I've written about puzzle design in RPGs, and that's going to be in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which is a new D&D book that is coming out, and I'm super excited about that. Things that are coming back up in the future that I'm working on right now, as the new senior producer at Renegade Games, I'm really thrilled. This is the first time I get to actually say it. It's so crazy. So exclusive, maybe not by the time this comes out, but I will be doing the role-playing games for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Transformers, and G.I. Joe coming out next summer. And that's super exciting, and I cannot wait.
The more you know. It's going to be great.
Congrats.
That's so awesome.
We're excited for you, Lisa. That's going to be awesome. John?
Yeah, so I'm Jon Cohn. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook as Jon Cohn. Coming out, it's board game adjacent. I have a jigsaw puzzle subscription service launching this week called Mystify Society. MystifySociety.com or on Facebook or Instagram. And the thing is that we've got like super great art, but we've also got kind of an ARG, an alternate reality game that is going to be built into our puzzles and games that we're going to be releasing through our monthly service. So as you stick with us and get some more puzzles, there will be an ARG that unfolds over time. So that is as much as I can tease right now, but yeah, by the time this goes live, it should already exist.
Cool.
So mystifysociety.com, Facebook, Instagram. You can also buy the puzzles just on their own, but the subscription service will save you some money on some stuff. So yeah.
That's great.
So excited. I'm so jazzed about this. You don't even understand.
Yeah, talk about
awesome.
This is a cool reveal panel. I like this. And also, I'm Ross Thompson. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Almost Kirk, and I'm marketing manager at the Op. We have lots of cool things coming out. Stay tuned for we're doing the Onward Quest of Yore role-playing game with Pixar Disney, which is going to be super cool. That'll be coming out soon. We've got the new The Shining Cody Chronicles game from Sen, which will be great. And there's just a lot more happening. So thank you for watching this panel for storytelling and media for the Comic-Con Museum. I had a great time, and I'm glad we got to do this. So thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.